I used to think the worst part of losing intimacy was the silence in bed. I was wrong. The worst part was realizing my wife still had warmth in her. She had just stopped saving any of it for me. My name is Daniel. I was 38 when I finally admitted something in my marriage had gone from temporary to permanent. My wife, Lauren, never said she stopped loving me. That would have been cleaner. Easier, in a brutal kind of way. Instead, she said she was overwhelmed. Stressed. Touched out. Drained from work, from life, from everything. She made it sound like her distance was just the cost of being an adult in a busy marriage, and for a long time, I believed her because I wanted to. We had been married for 9 years. No kids. Just a small house in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, 2 decent jobs, 1 dog that shed too much, and a routine that used to feel comforting. I worked in commercial property maintenance, the kind of job where something is always broken and somehow it becomes your emergency. Lauren worked in project coordination for a medical supply company. She was organized, sharp, good with people, and for most of our relationship, she had this easy warmth that made any room feel softer when she walked into it. That was the version of her I married. She used to lean into me without thinking. On the couch, in the kitchen, half asleep in bed. We had our own rhythm. Nothing dramatic. Nothing movie perfect. Just the kind of closeness that makes a marriage feel alive. A hand on my back while passing behind me. Her feet in my lap while we watched something neither of us cared about. A lazy Sunday morning where we stayed under the covers longer than we meant to because there was nowhere else we wanted to be. Then, little by little, she changed. Not all at once. That would have forced me to face it. No, this happened the way water damage happens behind a wall. Quietly. Slowly. By the time you notice it, the structure is already soft. At first it was just timing. She had a rough month at work. Then another. Then a new manager came in, and everything became urgent all the time. She came home tired, dropped her bag by the door, kicked off her shoes, and had that look on her face like the whole world had been pressing on her since 8 that morning. I tried to be the kind of husband who understood that. I told myself this was when you stepped up, not when you kept score. So I stepped up. I started cooking more. Not because she asked, but because I could see she had nothing left by the time she got home. I picked up groceries on the way back from work. I took over most of the laundry. Walked the dog before bed. Cleaned the kitchen before she even noticed it was messy. On weekends, I handled errands so she could sleep in or stare at her phone in peace or just sit there and not have to make one more decision. I was not doing any of that as some secret trade for affection. At least that is what I told myself. I did it because I loved her. Because I thought if life felt lighter, maybe she would come back to me. Instead, she drifted farther. The first thing to disappear was spontaneous touch. Then long hugs. Then the casual kisses that had nothing to do with sex. After that, even sitting close became rare. If I put a hand on her leg while we watched TV, she would shift after a few seconds like she needed more room. If I kissed her shoulder in bed, she would say she was tired in a tone that made me feel like I had asked for something unreasonable. If I moved toward her in the kitchen, she would give me a quick smile and slide past me with a plate in her hand like there was always one more thing to do. She never framed it as rejection. That was what made it so hard to argue with. She said her body felt overloaded. She said by the end of the day she did not want one more person needing anything from her. She said it was not me, and that phrase became the soundtrack of our marriage. Not you. Not personal. Not tonight. Not right now. Not in the mood. Just tired. Just stressed. Just touched out. Touched out. I hate how much that phrase worked on me. Because what was I supposed to do with that? Push back? Make her defend being exhausted? I did not want to be the husband who turned his wife's stress into a guilt trip. So I backed off. Then I backed off more. I stopped initiating because every rejection left a bruise, even when she delivered it gently. I stopped mentioning how long it had been since we felt like a couple. I stopped saying I missed her because every time I did, she looked at me with this tired sadness that made me feel selfish for bringing it up. The strange thing is, if you had looked at our marriage from the outside, you probably would have called it stable. We still had dinner together most nights. We still shared bills, plans, grocery lists, dog appointments, and holiday obligations. We still talked, technically. But our conversations started sounding like office emails. Efficient. Low risk. Informational. She would tell me about deadlines. I would tell her about a tenant flooding a break room sink or a busted HVAC unit on the west side of town. We could discuss a leaking faucet for 10 minutes and somehow say nothing real to each other all evening. It was not only the lack of intimacy that got to me. It was the feeling that she had placed me in some new category. Not husband. Not partner. Just the person who lived there and helped keep things running. Then I started noticing something that bothered me more than the rejection. Lauren was not cold all the time. That was the part I could not make fit. She still had patience on work calls. I would hear her in the next room speaking in that calm, warm voice I used to hear when it was just us. She still laughed at messages on her phone. Not huge laughs. Just those private little smiles that happen when something lands exactly right. She still had energy for long conversations with friends, co-workers, people from her office I had only met once or twice at company events. If a colleague texted at 9:30 at night, she somehow found the mental bandwidth to answer. If I asked how her day was at the same hour, I got one-word summaries and a tired exhale. At first, I felt guilty even noticing that. Then I started collecting moments without meaning to. She would come home barely able to look at me, say she had nothing left, and then 40 minutes later I would hear her in the kitchen talking on speaker with someone from work, sounding light, engaged, almost playful. Not inappropriate. Not enough for me to point it and say there it is. But enough to make me sit in the living room staring at the muted TV, wondering why the best version of my wife always seemed to come out for everyone except me. One name started surfacing more than the others. Evan. It was always casual when she mentioned him. Just a coworker. A guy on another team. Someone funny. Someone helpful. Someone who apparently understood every frustrating thing about her job in a way I never could because I was not there. I did not think much of it at first because I did not want to be that husband. The suspicious one. The insecure one. The guy who hears another man's name and starts building a case out of nothing. So I ignored it. I ignored the fact that she smiled at her phone more on nights his name came up. I ignored how often she said he had made her laugh during a meeting. I ignored the strange little lift in her voice when she repeated something he said. I ignored it because the alternative was uglier than I was ready for. Then one Thursday night, I got home early. Lauren did not hear me come in. The house was mostly dark except for the light over the stove. I set my keys down quietly and heard her voice from the kitchen. Low. Soft. The same woman who barely had energy to answer me after dinner somehow had this easy, almost intimate tone in her voice now. Not loud laughter. Not flirting you could catch in one sentence. Just warmth. Unforced warmth. I stood there by the entryway, listening without meaning to. She was talking to someone from work. I knew that much within seconds. And then I heard the name. Evan. I should have walked in right then. I should have made noise, announced myself, done anything other than stand there like a stranger outside my own life. But something in the way she sounded stopped me cold. Because I had not heard that version of my wife in a very long time. And for the first time, I felt something worse than loneliness. I felt replaced. After that night in the kitchen, I started noticing things I had been training myself not to see. That was the worst part. Not that Lauren suddenly changed after I heard her talking to Evan, but that she did not change at all. She kept moving through our days exactly the same way, and that was what made it impossible to dismiss. If I had caught her doing something obvious, maybe I could have had one clean fight, one ugly confrontation, one moment where everything cracked open. Instead, I got 100 small moments that built on each other until I could not breathe inside my own house without wondering what I was missing. The next morning, she acted normal. Or at least normal for the version of us that existed now. She was already dressed when I came into the kitchen. Navy blouse, black slacks, hair done a little more carefully than usual. Not like she was going to a party. Just polished. Deliberate. She stood at the counter pouring coffee into a travel mug, her phone face down beside her. When I asked if she wanted me to pick up dog food after work, she gave me a distracted yes without looking up. Then she said she had a late meeting and might be home after 7. That was it. No trace of the softness I had heard in her voice the night before. No sign that she had been standing in our kitchen, smiling into a conversation she did not even know I overheard. I remember watching her tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear while she checked the time on the microwave. Such a small thing. A normal thing. But something about how composed she looked made me feel stupid. Like maybe I had imagined the whole weight of that moment. Maybe I was so starved for affection that hearing my own wife sound warm to another human being had turned into something dark in my head. I clung to that explanation for almost 3 days. Then Saturday came. We had been invited to a casual get-together at the house of one of Lauren's co-workers. Not a real party. Just drinks, a grill, a few people from her office and their spouses. Normally she hated those things. She always said work had already taken enough of her time during the week. And the last thing she wanted on a Saturday was more small talk with people she saw every day. But that afternoon, She got ready without complaining once. I noticed because it was so unlike her lately. She took her time getting dressed. Changed outfits twice. Put on perfume I had not smelled in months. Not too much. Just enough that when she walked past me in the hallway, it stayed in the air for a second after she was gone. I had not seen her put that kind of effort into anything involving the two of us in a long time. On the drive there, she was almost upbeat. She scrolled through her phone at red lights, smiling to herself once, then catching it and looking out the window. I asked who all was going to be there, trying to keep my tone casual, and she listed off a few names from her office. Then she said Devin would probably show up later because he had some family thing earlier in the day. She said it like I was already supposed to know that. I kept my eyes on the road and nodded. That name had started landing differently every time I heard it. Not because I had proof of anything. Just because it always came wrapped in extra detail. More context than anyone else got. More awareness. More tension. The get-together itself should have made me feel better. Nothing dramatic happened. No obvious line got crossed. That was what made it worse. Lauren was good with everyone. Light. Present. Easy to be around. She laughed more in those 2 hours than she had with me in the previous 2 months. At one point she was standing on the back patio with a drink in her hand, listening to one of the women from her office tell a story. Her head tipped back when she laughed, and I had this sudden flash of memory so sharp it almost made me angry. That laugh used to belong to our house. Our kitchen. Our weekends. It used to come out when we were making dinner together or when I said something stupid on purpose just to hear it. Now I was standing 10 feet away watching strangers get the version of my wife I had been missing for over a year. When Evan finally showed up, I knew it was him before Lauren even turned around. He was tall, clean-cut, probably early 40s, the kind of guy who looked effortless in a way some men spend their whole lives trying to fake. He came through the side gate holding a six-pack and saying hello to people like he had done this 100 times. Nothing about him screamed threat. If anything, that made him easier to overlook. But not Lauren. The shift in her was small. So small I almost hated myself for seeing it. Her posture changed first. Then her face. It was like some hidden current moved through her. Not sexual. Not openly flirtatious. Just alert. Interested. More alive. She greeted him the way she greeted other people, but there was a softness around it, an ease that felt too familiar for someone who was supposed to be just another co-worker. The whole night I kept catching pieces of them together. Never alone for long. Never close enough to justify a scene in my head. But always orbiting each other. In the kitchen grabbing ice. Near the grill talking with 2 other people. By the back fence during a conversation that should have included 5 people and somehow felt like only 2. He made a comment at one point and Lauren laughed before he finished the sentence, like she already knew where he was going. That got under my skin more than it should have. That kind of rhythm does not come from office small talk. It comes from repetition. From private familiarity. From 2 people learning each other in all the little ways that are supposed to belong to someone else. On the drive home, she was quieter. I thought about asking her directly. Not accusing. Just asking why she seemed to have so much energy for everyone outside our marriage and none for me. But I already knew how it would go. She would get tired instantly. Defensive, not guilty. She would say I was reading into things because we had been disconnected for a while. She would remind me how stressful work had been. She would turn it into another conversation where I ended up apologizing for making her feel pressured. So I said nothing. When we got home, she kicked off her shoes, washed her face, and said she was exhausted. Then she went to bed before 11. I stayed up in the living room with the dog at my feet and the TV on mute again, replaying every moment from the evening. The more I replayed it, the less dramatic it looked. That should have comforted me. Instead, it made me feel crazy. There was no scene I could point to. No single expression, no touch, no sentence. Just an accumulation of things that would sound pathetic if I said them out loud. My wife laughed at another man's jokes. My wife seemed happier at a barbecue than she did at home. My wife wore perfume. That was not evidence. That was insecurity. At least that was what I kept telling myself. So I tried, one more time, to be reasonable. Over the next couple of weeks, I made a conscious effort not to spiral. I told myself the problem was still us, not some outside person. I doubled down on being patient. I kept doing the things I'd been doing. Dinner, laundry, errands, the quiet maintenance of a marriage that felt increasingly one-sided. I tried to talk to her about neutral things, hoping we could stumble back into each other somehow. Sometimes she responded. Mostly she gave me the same distracted half attention she gave commercials. Meanwhile, The little inconsistencies kept multiplying. She started bringing her phone into the bathroom with her, even just to brush her teeth. She began setting it face down more often, which was not something she used to do. A few times I came into a room and she tilted the screen away without thinking, then overcorrected by leaving it out in the open 5 minutes later like she had nothing to hide. She had late calls now, but only some of them sounded tired. Others had that same low, engaged tone I had heard in the kitchen. And then there were the names. Co-workers came and went in conversation, but Evan stayed. Always casually. Always naturally. Never enough to justify the alarm bells going off in my chest. Until one Tuesday night, Lauren had gone upstairs early saying she needed a shower and wanted to be left alone for a bit. I was in the kitchen loading the dishwasher when I saw her phone light up on the counter. She must have forgotten it. I did not walk over there right away. I actually stood frozen with a plate in my hand, staring at the glow on the granite like it was some kind of test. Then I set the plate down and looked. It was only a preview banner. Just one line. No thread. No context. But it was enough. It was from Evan. And it did not read like something meant for a woman who was just a co-worker. I wish I could say that message was explicit. I wish it had been something undeniable, something so obvious that it would have spared me the next few weeks of second-guessing myself. It was not. That was the part that kept me trapped. The preview only showed a few words before it disappeared, but the tone was wrong. Familiar in a way work messages are not supposed to be. It was not about a deadline. Not a question about a spreadsheet. Not some harmless joke in a group thread. It read like the continuation of something already in progress. Something personal. Something comfortable. By the time I picked up the phone, the banner was gone. Her lock screen stared back at me with the same photo it had worn for months, the one of us standing by Lake Erie 2 summers ago, smiling into the sun like we still belonged to each other. I remember holding that phone and feeling almost insulted by the picture. It looked like proof of a marriage that no longer existed. I put it back exactly where I found it. That night, I barely slept. Lauren came downstairs after her shower in oversized sleep shorts and one of my old college t-shirts, the same kind of outfit that used to make the house feel intimate just because she was in it. She brushed past me without touching me, filled a glass of water, and asked if I was coming to bed. I said in a minute. She nodded and went upstairs. Nothing in her face suggested panic. Nothing suggested she had any idea how close I had come to seeing more. That should have calmed me down. Instead, it made everything worse, because it meant whatever was happening had become normal to her. Easy. Integrated into her life so cleanly that she no longer even thought about it. The next morning I woke up with one decision made. I was done asking my gut to shut up. I was not going to accuse her based on a message preview and 100 little humiliations. But I was also not going to keep living in this fog where I felt crazy for seeing what was right in front of me. I needed something solid. Not because I wanted to catch her. Because I wanted to know whether the pain I had been swallowing for over a year had a shape. A reason. A face. So I started paying attention with purpose. Not in some dramatic private investigator way. I did not put trackers on cars or hide recorders in rooms. I just stopped looking away. I noticed patterns. Lauren's mood was never random. That was the first thing. I had spent months treating her distance like weather, like some shifting condition none of us could control. But once I really started watching, I saw her the minute. On certain mornings she was lighter before work, even if she had gone to bed cold and silent the night before. On certain evenings she came home almost glowing for an hour or two before settling back into that detached version of herself that seemed reserved for me. And on nights when she claimed she was mentally done with people, I would still hear her typing on her phone long after we had gone upstairs. I stopped trying to talk myself out of the details. She no longer left her phone charging on the kitchen counter overnight. It went upstairs with her. She used to toss it down anywhere in the house without thinking. Now it stayed within reach, always screened down, always close enough to check without making a show of checking it. I also noticed that Evan's name almost disappeared from casual conversation. That got my attention faster than if she had mentioned him more. People do not usually erase names unless they have become aware of how often they were saying them. It was like she had unconsciously corrected course. Other co-workers still got mentioned. Her manager. A woman from accounting. Someone named Chris who kept messing up vendor schedules. But Evan was gone from the harmless stories. Gone from the harmless complaints. He had moved from visible to protected. That told me more than the message preview had. One Friday afternoon, I got home before Lauren and found myself standing in the kitchen staring at the coffee maker while the dog circled my legs. I kept replaying that thought in my head. Visible to protected. I hated how accurate it felt. I hated that I was starting to think like this at all. When she came in 20 minutes later, she looked surprised to see me. Not guilty. Just startled. She smiled, but it was the polite kind. The kind you give a neighbor. I asked how her day went. She said long. I asked if she wanted dinner now or later. She said later. Then her phone buzzed in her purse and I watched a tiny change pass through her face before she reached for it. Not joy exactly. Not panic. Anticipation. A private alertness. She checked the screen, typed something quickly, and looked up at me like nothing had happened. That night, she sat beside me on the couch for almost 20 whole minutes, which should have felt like progress. Instead, it felt staged. Like she had sensed the distance getting too obvious and was trying to restore the appearance of normal without offering anything real. Her body stayed angled away. Her eyes stayed on her phone half the time. When I rested my arm on the back cushion behind her, she did not lean in or pull away. She just remained there, neutral as furniture. I realized then that what I missed most was not sex. It was being wanted in the small ways. Being chosen to receive her real face at the end of the day. Her real voice. Her looseness. Her unguarded self. Somewhere along the line, I had become the place where she managed her energy while someone else got what was left when she felt alive. Once I saw that clearly, I could not unsee it. A few days later, I found the first piece of actual evidence. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were usually my longest day on the West Side properties, and I got home late enough that Lauren was normally already in lounge clothes, mentally checked out. But a tenant emergency got cancelled, and I pulled into the driveway just after 6. Lauren's car was there. I came in quietly because I was on the phone wrapping up something with a vendor. The house was silent except for the low hum of the dryer. When I ended the call, I heard Lauren upstairs in our bedroom. Not talking. Moving around. Dresser drawers opening and closing. I went up a minute later and found her changing her shirt. She turned too fast when I appeared in the doorway. That was the first thing. The second was what she was changing into. Not pajamas. Not an old sweatshirt. A dark green blouse I had not seen in months. One she used to wear when we went out to dinner somewhere nicer than usual. On the bed was a small pile of rejected outfits and a pair of earrings beside them. She recovered quickly and said a few people from work had decided to grab drinks after a rough week. It was Tuesday. I do not know why that detail mattered so much, but it did. Tuesday drinks after a rough week. Tuesday, when the rough week was barely halfway through. I asked where. She named a place downtown. I asked who was going. She answered too fast, listing 4 names in a row, and Evan was third. I nodded like that meant nothing. She watched my face for a second, maybe to see if I would ask more. When I did not, she relaxed. Not fully. Just enough. After she left, I stood in the bedroom and looked at the open closet, the disturbed hangers, the perfume bottle on the dresser. Then I looked at the bed and saw her old gray cardigan half under a pillow. Her phone was not there. Of course it was not there. I sat on the edge of the mattress and felt something settle in me. Not peace. Not anger either. Just a colder kind of clarity. The kind that comes when hope starts losing the fight. When Lauren got home that night, it was after 10. She smelled like perfume and outdoor air and something else I could not place, something faintly sweet and unfamiliar. She was not drunk. She was composed. Her makeup had faded a little around the eyes, and there was a looseness to her expression I had not seen with me in a long time. She said the team had needed to blow off steam. She said she was tired. She said goodnight. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I noticed her phone on the bathroom counter. For a second I just stood there. I had never gone through her phone before. Not once in 9 years. Even during the worst months, I had told myself there had to be some line between pain and self-respect. Some line that, once crossed, changed you too. But standing there in the doorway, listening to the shower run, I also understood something else. She had already changed the rules without telling me. I picked up the phone. It lit up in my hand. No password prompt. Just the home screen. My heart hit so hard it felt like embarrassment. I was not calm. I was not strategic. My hands were shaking enough that I nearly opened the wrong app twice. I checked messages first. Nothing from Evan in the regular text thread. Then I checked recent calls. His name was there. Not daily. Not enough to scream affair on its own. But frequent. More frequent than she ever admitted. Short calls during lunch hours. Longer ones in the evening. A couple close to 10 at night. Then I opened the messaging app she used for work. That was where I found it. Not one smoking gun. Something worse. A whole tone. Inside jokes. Complaints about meetings that turned into personal venting. References to being mentally drained at home. Comments from him that crossed just far enough over the line to tell me the line had already been softened between them. Comments from her that did not shut any of it down. He told her she deserved a night that was actually fun. She answered that he was trouble. Not offended. Not formal. Not distant. Comfortable. There were no explicit photos. No direct declarations. No clean confession I could screenshot and throw in her face. But the intimacy was there in the pattern. In the private rhythm. In the way they spoke like two people who had built a small hidden room together and kept visiting it. Then I found one message from 3 nights earlier that made my stomach drop. She had told him she could not talk because I was home. Not because she was busy. Not because she was with her husband. Because I was home. Like I was an obstacle. A logistical issue. A reason their real conversation had to pause. I heard the shower shut off. I put the phone back exactly where I found it and walked out before she opened the bathroom door. All day at work, I moved through tasks like a machine. I fixed a leaking valve in a tenant suite, signed off on a delivery, answered 3 emails, and remembered none of it. My body was there. My mind kept replaying those messages. Not because they were graphic. Because they were worse than graphic. They were intimate in the way that steals the foundation first. The kind of betrayal that starts by making your marriage emotionally optional before anyone even admits what it has become. By then I knew enough to stop lying to myself. But I still did not know how far it had gone. That question followed me home like a shadow, and that night, when Lauren came downstairs smiling faintly at something on her phone before her face went blank the second she saw me, I understood one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever this was, it had already grown larger than the version she thought I could survive. The thing people do not understand about betrayal is that the truth rarely arrives all at once. It leaks in. First through silence. Then through distance. Then through little humiliations you keep swallowing because the alternative is too ugly to name. By the time I finally saw the full shape of what Lauren had done, I had already been living inside it for months. After I read those messages, I stopped looking for reassurance. That part of me was gone. I still moved carefully. I still did not confront her right away. But the reason changed. Before, I had stayed quiet because I was afraid of being wrong. Now I stayed quiet because I knew I was right, and I needed to know how deep the lie went before I opened the door and let it flatten everything. Over the next week, I watched her with a kind of numb clarity. It is strange what happens when hope leaves the room. You stop negotiating with reality. You stop trying to explain away details that do not deserve your loyalty. You just see. Lauren was not confused. She was not trapped in some vague emotional fog. She was building a second life in plain sight, one small choice at a time. Every soft smile at her phone. Every quick turn of the screen. Every night she told me she had nothing left while spending another hour messaging him after I went upstairs. It all looked different once I stopped viewing her as a tired wife and started viewing her as someone protecting a connection that mattered more to her than my peace. I began noticing how often she dressed better on days Evan was likely involved in some work event. Not always. She was too careful for that. But often enough that a pattern emerged. I noticed that when she came home flat and irritated, it usually meant they had not had much contact that day. When she came home withdrawn but strangely lighter underneath it, it meant they had. I hated how quickly I started understanding her moods once I removed myself from the center of them. That realization hurt more than the messages. Because all that time I had been blaming myself. I thought maybe I was not attentive enough. Maybe I had gotten too predictable. Maybe if I made life easier, gave her more space, expected less, she would find her way back. Meanwhile, she had quietly moved her emotional life somewhere else and left me with logistics. One Thursday evening, she said she had to stay late for a vendor issue. I nodded and told her to be safe. She left at 7 in a cream sweater I had not seen in months. At 8:30, I was sitting in my truck 3 blocks from the wine bar downtown she had named the week before. I am not proud of that. But by then pride had become a luxury. I was no longer trying to preserve some cleaner version of myself. I was trying to survive the truth without letting her rewrite it while I stood there bleeding. I saw her car in the lot. That should have been enough. But I waited. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then I saw them through the front windows. Lauren and Evan, seated at a small table near the side wall. Not with a group. Not with coworkers. Just the two of them. I cannot explain the feeling of seeing your marriage reduced to a visual you can understand in 1 second. He was leaning forward. She was smiling in that quiet, private way I had once believed belonged to me. Not big. Not theatrical. Not drunk. Comfortable. Familiar. She touched his wrist when she laughed at something he said, and that tiny gesture hit harder than anything else. Because it was effortless. Unforced. The exact thing she had spent over a year teaching me not to ask for. I stayed there long enough to watch her become someone I recognized and did not recognize at the same time. Alive. That was the word that kept crushing me. Alive for him. When I got home, I sat in the dark living room and waited. Lauren walked in a little after 10. She saw me on the couch and stopped for half a second. Just half. Then she resumed moving like normal, setting down her purse, kicking off her shoes, smoothing her hair back. She said the vendor issue had dragged on longer than expected. I looked at her and felt something in me go completely still. Not rage. Stillness. I asked if it was just her and Evan. Her face changed. That was the first honest expression I had gotten from her in a long time. It was not guilt right away. It was calculation. Fast, cold, almost invisible if you were not staring straight at it. Her eyes shifted, her shoulders tightened, and I knew in that second that she had been lying for so long she no longer reacted like a wife caught in a mistake. She reacted like someone deciding which version of the lie still had a chance. She asked what I meant. I told her I meant the wine bar. The table by the side wall. The part where there was no vendor issue and no group from work and no confusion left to hide behind. For a second, she said nothing. Then she sat down across from me and did what people do when they are cornered with truth but still afraid of consequence. She tried to downgrade it. She said it was not what it looked like. She said they had become close. She said he had been there for her during a stressful year. She said she had not known how to talk to me anymore because every conversation with us felt heavy. I listened to all of it without interrupting. Then I asked the only question that mattered. I asked whether it had been physical. She looked down. And that was the answer before she even spoke. She said not at first. That sentence is still burned into me. Not at first, like there had been stages. Like there had been some gradual moral weathering that made the final step more understandable. She said it started emotional. She said she felt seen by him. She said she had not planned any of it. She said one night after drinks a few weeks earlier, things crossed a line. Then she cried. Quietly. Controlled. Not the kind of crying that comes from sudden remorse. The kind that comes when a secret can no longer survive. I asked how long. She said about 4 months emotionally. Physical for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. That was almost funny in a sick way, because 3 weeks was all it took for her to come home and keep looking me in the face like I was the problem. 3 weeks of sleeping beside me after giving herself to someone else. 3 weeks of acting exhausted and touched out while somehow finding enough energy to be wanted somewhere else. Then I asked her the thing that had been rotting inside me longer than any other question. I asked if she ever really lost her desire, or if she just lost it for me. That was the first moment she cried hard. She said she did not know when it happened. She said things between us had started feeling like obligation. She said with him it felt easy. Easy. I almost laughed when she said that. Not because it was funny. Because of course it felt easy. Affairs always get the edited version of a person. No bills. No history. No dog hair in the hallway, no long work weeks, no disappointments stacked over 9 years. He got the curated warmth while I got the fatigue, the guilt, and the leftovers. But even then, the sex was not what destroyed me most. It was the manipulation. It was the fact that she had made me feel needy for wanting closeness while she was giving tenderness, attention, and desire to someone else. She did not just betray me. She let me blame myself while she did it. I stood up and told her I was done. Not done for the night. Done. She kept crying then, saying she had been confused, that she never meant for it to go this far, that she thought she could stop it before I found out. I remember looking at her and thinking how strange it was to finally hear urgency in her voice and not want any of it. For over a year I had been starving for some sign that I still mattered to her emotionally. Now that it was there, it was only there because she was losing her landing spot. I told her she could call whoever she needed to call, but she was not sleeping in our bed that night. She asked if we could at least talk in the morning. I said there was nothing left to explain. She slept in the guest room. I did not sleep at all. The next day, I called in sick for the first time in years and met with a lawyer by noon. Everything after that moved faster than the marriage had died. Funny how that works. The paperwork. The separating of accounts. The practical language people use when a life breaks apart. Lauren tried, for a while, to frame what happened as a symptom of our distance rather than the cause of it. But I never let her hand that weight back to me. We had problems. Real ones. Cold seasons, missed conversations, Routines that had gone stale. Marriages survive those things all the time. What they do not survive is one person quietly stepping outside the relationship and then making the other person feel defective for noticing the absence. She moved out within a month. I heard through a mutual friend later that things with Evan did not last. That detail gave me no satisfaction. It did not fix anything. Affairs are built in stolen light. They do not always survive daylight. What stayed with me was simpler than anger. It was the memory of how long I had doubted my own pain. How many nights I sat in that house telling myself to be patient, to be understanding, to be less needy. How many times I swallowed loneliness because I thought love meant making room for someone else's exhaustion. Maybe sometimes it does. But love is not supposed to require you to disappear so the other person can betray you comfortably. The hardest truth I learned was not that Lauren cheated. It was that by the end, she had stopped seeing me as a husband before I stopped seeing her as a wife. And once I understood that, leaving was the only honest thing I had left.